I guess as good a place to start as any is to just say and acknowledge how good it is to be here this morning, and how glad I am to be here this morning, how glad I am to have been asked to be here this morning. Most of the people in this room know me. Most of the people in this room have heard me admit in the past, when I've had chances to share, to being a ponderer. And there's been lots of pondering going on in my life lately. And pondering is, kind of a great thing, except eventually it needs some sort of an outlet. And so this really is kind of my first outlet chance. And I think I've needed that. I think I've needed that to help me process some things. But let me just start with a few. I think they're going to seem like random thoughts, and I hope that by the time I'm done here, they won't seem quite so random. So first, a verse, 2 Timothy 1:12, says, "I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed to him." So I'm going to unpack that just a little bit. I know whom I have believed. Not know of, but know. I know whom I have believed, and I am persuaded. Alternate translation might be, I have been convinced. Ladies, we have seen the evidence over and over and over again in our lives that he is able. And able, that's just an understatement. I don't think there's more I can say about that. Such an understatement. He is able to keep that which we've committed to him. Okay? That's one thought. Hold on to it. Another thought for this chance to share today. There's a relatively famous person by the name of Rick Warren. At least he's well known within evangelical circles. Wrote a little book that's even perhaps more well known, The Purpose-Driven Life. And I'm not really sure, speaking for myself, that I ever feel like I've managed to lead a purpose-driven life. Seems more like random things that just kind of happen to me, and also because, honestly, and it's not an exaggeration to say this, self-discipline is not my personality strength by any means. But what I have seen God do, I will call a repurpose-driven life. Stop that microphone. A repurposed. Things that come into our life that seem like catastrophes sometimes, that seem meaningless sometimes, that seem overwhelming sometimes, that God repurposes and uses and uses and uses. And I think what that is, honestly, I think what those things are, on the really good days when you feel really close to God, and you dare to say, and you mean it for that little tiny moment when you say it, you say to God, you can do anything in my life. I trust you. I love you. I know that you are God, and you can do anything you want in my life. Use me. And you mean it for that one little second, and about 2 minutes later, if you could take it back, you would, but guess what? He's already heard it, and he's already accepted that prayer, and he knows we mean it. And he knows also, certainly for me, that I'm not able to live up to it 99.9% of the time. Much as I meant it when I said it, I cannot live up to it. So he brings things into our lives that enable us to do the very same thing that we want to do. I mean, it's our heart's desire, except on my own, I can't do it. And he says, so here's this circumstance. Here's this opportunity. Here's this thing. And hold on to that thought too. One other random thought that will seem random. My little light. Okay, isn't it? Yeah, cool. See, it can illuminate like this table. It doesn't look particularly like strong in any way, shape, or form. If I try to shine it back at Jim, I don't get any illumination. Now, I thought about actually doing this, but I know if I turn these lights off in this room, it takes them a while to come back on. So I'm not actually going to do that. But if I could have a couple of helpers. There's one per table. You each get a little light to take home with you. Okay? So let me tell you about this little light. This little light. It's a homework assignment. You didn't know you were going to get a homework assignment. The Brene Brown, some of you will be familiar with who she is. She's a very popular at the moment PhD professor at the University of Houston, and author, and I love Wikipedia. It says she's an author, she's a scholar, she's a professor, and she's a storyteller. And I went, yes, and she's younger than I am, so I can say it this way. That's a woman after my own heart. She's a storyteller. But one of her quotes, and I like it because it's very succinct, which I tend not to be so much. One of her quotes says, "If you numb the darkness, you numb the light." And I think that's emotionally speaking. If I put that in terms of this little light of mine, if you dim the darkness, like this room here that's already lit, you dim the light. So your homework assignment is to take this little light home and find yourself a dark corner and see how powerful this little light is. But everything in us screams to dim darkness when it enters our life unbidden, okay? We really try to mitigate the darkness. So one of the things that I've been pondering about since cancer entered my life last November 12th, actually entered before that, but it didn't have a name until November 12th. One of the things I've been pondering about is we hear all kinds of terminology about how you accept trials and difficulties, and certainly how you accept illness and chronic illness and stuff like that. And we hear about, fighting it, we hear about winning it, we hear about, rebuking it. Yes, we sure, yeah, good point. We sure do hear about that. Yeah. What I do is I put it in my Bible. Okay, yeah. So we hear about all these things. So it's like we're at war with it, and we somehow have to win the war over this darkness. But there's different terminology. One of them would be accept it, okay? And then there's another word, and this is the one that I've been pondering. There's another word that seems so different in reaction. We hear about embracing difficulties. We hear about embracing trials. And I have wondered and wondered and wondered, what does that really mean? And what does that look like? And how do we embrace these things that God allows in our life? So, okay, so a few stories, okay, a few cancer stories, a very brief background, because honestly I get tired of talking about cancer. But I had symptoms for probably as long as a year that at first just seemed somewhat annoying to me and didn't occur all that often, and then got more frequent, and then got way more annoying, and then got to be downright distressful. And being my typical self who I am, did all the things that I would tell somebody else not to do, like, trying to self-diagnose, and because I have a medical background, and looking it up online and deciding it really wasn't all that serious, and finally being forced to admit that whatever was going on was not going to be able to go on anymore, aside from the fact that I also lost 50 pounds during that period of about 7 or 8 months. So finally got in to see a doctor, finally got scheduled for, and the specific symptoms, and I'm really not going to go into this very much, but the specific symptoms were that I was having great difficulty swallowing food. It would just get stuck so in your esophagus. And so your esophagus is meant to process food and let it go from mouth to stomach, but it's not meant to have food backed up in it, and it really doesn't react very kindly when that happens in the most, you don't need, it would really be too much information, but just take it from me that when it backs up and it can't go down, it has to come back up again. And that got to the point where it was happening. Almost I'd sit down with a plate of food and be literally like afraid to eat it, because when it happened, it sometimes lasted hours before the esophagus cleaned itself out, and it was not fun by any way, shape, or form. So anyway, finally saw a doctor. Doctor actually agreed with me that of a certain diagnosis, long name, not worth mentioning, but scheduled me for an endoscopy and said, he said, now I can't promise, until we look. I can't promise that this is what it is. I can never promise that something isn't cancer until we actually look, but you have none of the whatever word I just lost. Not symptoms, but none of the Yeah, something like that. One of those things. None of the risk factors. Thank you. None of the risk. You don't smoke. You don't drink. You don't. All these things that it would be. You have no family history of cancer. All the things that would be potential risk factors. But when the endoscopy was done, there was no doubt. I mean, he knew by the time I was waking up from the anesthesia that there was a primary stomach cancer, and it had sort of invaded into where the esophagus joins the stomach, and it just narrowed that opening so much that food literally just physically couldn't get from esophagus into stomach. And so he actually sort of fixed that a little bit at the time he did the endoscopy, and then that set a trajectory for life, CAT scans and oncologist and more scans. And I made a couple of decisions very early on. I guess they were decisions. At least they were things that impressed themselves on me. Okay, one of them is, and I think I said it to Jeff first. Cancer is a thing. It's a thing with a capital TH. And I have no idea where it's going. And honestly, as I stand here today, I still don't know how it's going to be used or what God's going to do with it. But I know whom I have believed, and I know he can keep what's been committed to him. So that was one decision I made. Another decision that I made really, really early on was to recognize, because from the get-go, the doctors, I was going to say haven't used the word cure. Actually, they used it. They used it in the way I didn't want them to use it. This kind of cancer, it was already stage 4 by the time I was diagnosed. This kind of cancer, we don't have a cure for. Now, I mean, that's medically speaking, right? So I leave that as that stands. Nobody knows. Maybe, I don't know. He didn't even quote numbers. He just said, we're not going to cure this. We're going to keep it at bay, is the word they like to use. So, and it will, according to medical science, it will be with me for whatever the length of my days is. And I get that that's a term that gets really confusing to me, because I sometimes say to my doctor, like, how long do I have to do this chemotherapy thing, like for the rest of my life? And I have no idea whether my version of the rest of my life and his conception of the rest of my life have anything at all in common. I really don't know. I'm getting greedier with that than I was early on. But anyway, I decided that I had this companion that had come into my life, and that's what I was going to call it, and I sort of still do. And it wasn't a companion that I chose, but clearly it was a companion God chose for me. And so cancer and I were going to somehow get on friendly terms, which I think is a little bit of the idea of embracing it. So it was coming along for the ride, but it wasn't in the driver's seat, you guys. It's not in the driver's seat. I still get to be the driver, and this thing called cancer is coming along with me. And so that was another thing. And a kind of a third thing that I decided early on was I refuse, you know me well enough, I refuse to be pathetic. I just absolutely refuse to be pathetic. So I, at that point, actually sort of needed a whole new wardrobe because nothing fit. Actually, I have the same pair of jeans in size 12, 10, 8, 6, and 4. And honestly, it's like, I know this pair of jeans, I like it, I know the maker, I know the style, and I ordered most of them off of eBay used, because I was like, I'm not going to stay this size. I wasn't really planning on going down, I was more thinking of going back up. But nonetheless, I have the same pair of jeans in 5 different sizes, which I think is sort of funny. And if I'm going to talk about cancer, well, let me back up for 1 minute here, and let me try to keep track of my time. So if you dim the darkness, you dim the light, right? There's another thing. I want to put this in a context, in a framework, okay, in a context. And I want to put it in a context of the God that we worship and the God that we trust, the God that we believe in. So I'm going to throw out a question. It's a science question, but if anybody feels like they have an answer to it, I'll entertain answers before I give you the answer. So here's one question. How many stars, okay, our sun is a star, right? How many stars in the Milky Way galaxy? A lot. Yeah, that's a really good answer, but it kind of cheats, but it's still a good answer. How about in numbers? That's actually an overestimate. Hardly ever happens. Okay, 300 billion. Okay, 300 billion in our one galaxy. Okay, and just to give you an idea of the difference between like million and billion, because you know what, those are all big numbers, right? A million seconds equates to 11 and a half days. A billion seconds equates to 32 years. Okay? It's an order of magnitude times 1,000. A trillion seconds would be 32,000 years. Okay? And if you multiply the number of galaxies times some average number of stars per galaxy and try and figure out the number of stars in the universe, it comes out to be something billion trillion, like times 10 to the 22nd. And the only reason I want to make that point, like I said, I want to put this into context. I want to make that point because if we believe what we say we believe, that there is a God who spoke this universe into being, we're talking a God so immensely, unfathomably huge, beyond our ability to even wrap our brains around. But I think we need to wrap our brains around the fact that we can't wrap our brains around how big this God is. And at the same time, so that's the God of the big, at the same time, the same, big God is also the God of the small, because Scripture says He knows if a sparrow falls. He knows the number of hairs on my head. This actually is a wig. The number of hairs on my head, I think there has to be a very junior angel assigned to keep track, because it changes by the minute. If I just go like this, and it's not the kind of chemotherapy that caused it all to fall out in great hunks in like 48 hours. It is, well, according to my doctor, it thins. Well, it was thin to begin with, and baby fine. I've not had anything other than baby fine hair from the day I was born. And by the time 8 rounds of chemotherapy, and it has thinned and thinned and thinned, and nothing grows back in, I looked in the mirror and I said, you just really should I'm going to be proactive about this. I'm just going to say, this isn't a good look anymore. It looks way more pathetic than what I want to look like. And so a wig seemed like a good idea. And I think it works, I think. I'm still a little not used to it. It's so much thicker than any hair that I've ever had on my own. And for those of you here, I feel a little bit like I'm channeling Texas here, like I'm channeling Beth Moore. And I can't decide if I'm okay with that or not. But anyway, so the look works for her. And okay, well, trust me, it's better than what's underneath. And furthermore, the American Cancer Society, oh my gosh, you guys, there are people out there that the amount of support that has been available to Jeff and I, both from people like you and from the American Cancer Society and from just other businesses in town, they provide free wig. They provide your own consultant at the wig boutique. You go in, they let you try on all these, from the ridiculous to this might work. I took a couple of people with me and had my very own Say Yes to the Dress. Some of you might have seen that show on TV. This was Say Yes to the Wig. So there were some yeses, there were some definite nos. There were all kinds of comments about, which ones looked natural and which ones didn't, and this one ended up being sort of the top choice. And my daughter Angela was with me, and the lady that was my own private consultant said, so do you want me to put it back in the box, or are you going to wear it out, wear it home? I'm like, I think I'll wear it. And Angela, who was sitting behind me now, in all fairness, goes, well then, Mom, you might want to cut the tag off, because it looks a lot less natural with the tag hanging off the back. Best line of the morning. Okay, so a few other stories. So we've got the God of the big. We've got the God of the small. Let me just tell you a few things. And not to be self-serving and saying it this way. I have heard it said, I think Maggie phrased it this way when I first started down this road. She said, I've had friends on chemo before. Chemo is not for the faint of heart. Boy, she was right, and boy did I not know, and boy have I been way less than sympathetic with other people going through it. So I suspect that all of us in this room at some point will know somebody, maybe really know, maybe family member, maybe know as a close friend, will know somebody that is going through chemotherapy. And it's a thing too. My health issues at the moment are not cancer related. Actually, the very first round of chemotherapy took care of the swallowing issue, reduced the tumor enough that I have had no issues with that since round 1 of chemotherapy. Praise God is right, because praise God is right. My doctor said halfway through, so the prescribed course of treatment was 6 rounds of every other week chemotherapy, which looks like going into the cancer center one day, staying there for about 4 hours. I'm on 2 different chemo drugs plus some other additional stuff and anti-nausea meds and extra fluids. And they said, my weight was such an issue. I think I was down to 92 pounds before my first round of chemo. And they're like, you have got to gain weight. And I'm like, well, great. A, I can't eat. B, you're giving this stuff that makes me really feel like the first round of, the first trimester of pregnancy for 4 or 5 days out of every 2 weeks. And you want me to drink a half a gallon of water a day? I'm like, if I drink half a gallon of water a day, I'm not going to eat anything because anyway. So we worked some of that out, and they agreed that I could get a lot of extra fluids IV and concentrate on eating and whatever. I've gained back 20 pounds. Yeah, I know, that's like a real achievement, It's not what most of us worry about. So, but anyway, I just will say about, all right, so I go in on Tuesday, I'm there for about 4 hours, and I come home with this little infusion pump, this little portable pump that I wear in this little crossbody bag for 48 hours and then go back on 2 days later, and they take that back and de-access the port here and whatever, all that. It goes on. It's kind of gotten to be a routine, and actually my outline for this talk got done when I was sitting there for 4 hours 2 weeks ago, which for me is way ahead of schedule. So, chemo changes everything, and I'm just going to run it down really quick because, it changes everything. Like the way things smell and the way things taste and the way I have lost a lot of sensation in my fingertips because I had this one really rare side effect that my doctor, who is young, so young, 35, his Dr. Daravu, but his first name is Kevin, and I call him Kev, though not to his face, but to the nurses in the infusion side, and they think it's hysterical, and I think it's kind of funny, but just my luck, he said, you are literally the first patient that I've ever seen have this particular side effect from this particular drug. Like, well, great. It makes my, anyway, it's terrible. Makes my hands swell up, and then about 3 days later, they totally peel, like all the skin on my hands, and they're sore, and they're whatever. It compromises life in ways that I would not necessarily have expected, but everything it's kind of like being an alien in your own body. Just everything is different. Everything that goes in, everything that comes out. Even my sense of smell, my husband that bought me a year ago at Christmas time my very favorite perfume that I would have never paid for myself, went into Ulta by himself. His 2 daughters were like, Dad did what? It doesn't even smell good anymore. That's just so sad. But and then they tell you all these things that it can do in addition to what they hope it will do, and you have to sign this thing that says you agree to have this mainlined into your bloodstream every other week. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And then, but like I said, my doctor said I would be happy if your repeat scans after the first 6 rounds of every other week chemo just showed no change. And I'm like, dude, do you know how many people are praying they would not be happy? That is not what they're asking for. But we got much better results than that, actually, from the first round of repeat scans a month or so ago, in that everything had shrunk. There was significant lymph node involvement, and everything across the board looked better. So that was wonderful, obviously, except that it means it's working. And so if it's working, what does that mean? You keep doing it. Really? That was one of my, for the rest of my life, questions. And I'm like, whatever that means to him. So we agreed on 6 more and then repeat scans. Okay, so you can't possibly already be off. I want to finish in a place, a couple of places, if I can take about 5 more minutes. I want to tell you of some of the just utterly kind things. And when we talk about being the hands and feet of Jesus, we super really truly are, okay? So I brought a bag of goodies here. Okay. This is the stack of cards that I've received. Now, I took all the envelopes out, or it would look much more. It's over 50, and they still come in. It wasn't like these all happened within the first few weeks. I mean, most of them did, but they still come in 2 or 3 a week. And some people have sent multiple cards, okay? This was a check from a friend of mine, stay-at-home mom with 3 young kids. I know she doesn't have a penny to spare. She's removed from me, and she sent me this check before Jeff and I went to California, and she said, because I can't be there to do anything, I can't bring a meal, go out to dinner, have fun. This is when my family somehow conspired right after the initial diagnosis was made to bring our youngest son home from California, and literally jaw dropped when he showed up in my living room the day after Thanksgiving. So there was that, but then there was also, and I think half of Wheaton knew he was coming somehow. You guys are really good secret keepers, because boy, I didn't know, and who would have even thought you could get an airline ticket the day after Thanksgiving on very short notice. And then not only does he show up, but we have all our family gathered, which doesn't happen that often. And lo and behold, a certain Jim and Mary Whitmer, who knew that he was coming, managed to contact a daughter and say, so we will be at your house on Sunday afternoon to take family photo. We really, truly, literally did not have a complete family photo until that day. So that happened. Here's 2 prayer shawls. Now this one was made by my sister, so I guess that's not necessarily too unexpected, except she's part of a prayer shawl ministry at the church that she belongs to. And they meet once a month, the group of women that make these on a regular continuing basis, and they pray over and dedicate them, and then they're just available as needs arise. Well, this one she had made with, without me in mind, only it got prayed over and dedicated on the day that I got diagnosed, so it came to me, was meant to be mine. This one came from what I would call, you would know the name, but I'm not naming names, I'm naming God. This one came from a casual acquaintance, really no more than that, who said, God has so put you on my heart and so nudged me that this one was made and hand-delivered and prayed over the whole time she was making it. So that happened. I mentioned to a friend of mine, well, I didn't mention, it came up in a conversation that otters were my favorite animal. And about 2 days later, this got delivered. Okay. And these people show up at my door unexpected, don't you dare. Unexpected, and they apologize for coming over, and I'm like, oh my gosh, really? And they're like, I'm sorry to bother you, but here's this, or I'm sorry to bother you, but here's this prayer shawl. I'm like, what in the world? These have been coming on a regular basis. Now, there is a story behind these, but I don't have time to tell it. These are warm fuzzies, and they keep arriving. It's sometimes not safe to walk out the back door of my house because there will be an envelope of warm fuzzies, and they just keep on coming. And now that my bear has overflowed, I'm not quite sure where they're going to go, but and they even sometimes show up in like a shipment of pears that came from I don't know. They're a force to be reckoned with, this group of ladies. So I was diagnosed in November and started chemotherapy for the first time in December, and I hate winter anyway, and it was going to be, a long, cold winter and a lot to face. And this blanket in this box, this blanket showed up, and there's no other blanket even like this blanket, nor is there any other box like that box, not to mention slippers to match.
I think I said it by myself.
You do not get it. If you see me after, I'll tell you who you can ask where they got it from, and maybe you can get one of your own. I don't even this one stays in the box because I don't even let anybody else in my own family use this blanket, Gloria. This is my blanket. All right. Let's see how I want to wrap up here. So, okay. So those are all some of the great things, just some. I mean, the prayers and the plants and the shawls and the cards and the meals and the warm fuzzies, and an email from a friend when she first found out that said, I am not okay with this. And I know that we need to accept what God allows into our life, and that's it, you know. Jesus said to Peter, Satan asked permission to sift you. And I read that and everything in me wants to scream, why did you not say no? And then Jesus says, and this is supposed to comfort Peter, but I've prayed for you, Peter, that your faith would not fail. Satan cannot. I mean, he is the one whose plans for us are to steal and kill and destroy. But he can't throw that into our lives unless he's been given permission. And the bigger the thing with a capital TH is, the bigger the thing that God is going to do with it is. And we know that from the cross. We know that from the cross. So, yeah, my friend said, I'm not okay with this, and this is not my personality. I'm a warrior personality, and sweetest email, and she gave me this image at the end, and I am flying through your universe. Imagine me flying through the darkness of your universe right now and piercing holes so the light can come through. I would like to take you through the book of Ruth. I don't have time, but you know, I'm assuming you know the story. If you don't, it's 4 little chapters and you can go home and read it. But we know that Naomi is her mother-in-law, and they start out in a foreign land, and Ruth refuses, and they lose 3 husbands. Naomi's husband and her 2 daughters-in-law, all 3 of them lose their husband. So now we've got 3 single women, and it is absolutely impossible to imagine the degree to which they had no standing in the society back in that day and age, no resources, no ability to care for themselves. And they get ready to return to Israel, and Naomi says to her daughters-in-law, stay here in Moab, and one of them chooses to do that, but Ruth, as we know, says to Naomi, no, don't ask me to do that. You know, where you go, I will go, and where you live, I will live, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God, and where you are buried, there I'll be buried beside you. And so her loyalty to her mother-in-law, Naomi, and they return to Bethlehem because the famine that caused the family to locate in Moab is over, and they have a better chance, at least Naomi has a better chance as being native to Israel, to survive. But she returns so bitter, and all the women, when she comes back, and this has been going on for some number of years, 15 maybe, not a short period of trial. I mean, I think sometimes we even look at Jesus on the cross and go, you only had to endure that for 6 hours. I've been through this for, 6 months. And of course, that's a totally unreasonable thing to say to Jesus, but sometimes we feel that way. Naomi's trials were not short. And she returns, and the women say, is this Naomi? And she says, don't even call me that anymore. God has stripped me from everything. And she totally assigns that to God. Not in any kind of accusatory way. She just says, this is what happened. And God has taken everything away from me. Call me Mara. And then, again, really quickly recapping the story. To fill the most basic of needs, Ruth decides to go glean. They just need food, and gleaning typically provides food for a day. It's not like a grand it's not like a grand solution to a problem. It's a tiny little thing like bringing a meal to my house, tiny little thing like a card. And she gleans, and she just happens to end up in Boaz's field, and she goes home with way more than you would expect from a day of gleaning. And Naomi says, whose field did you glean in? And she says, Boaz. And Naomi immediately says, now Naomi had no hope when she returned. Look at your bookmarks and keep track with me here for a minute. Naomi returned to Israel with no hope. Okay? And Ruth says, I gleaned in Boaz's field, and Naomi immediately says, that's our closest kinsman. He's a redeemer, okay? And suddenly the spark of hope is there. And then the grand scheme is hatched because Boaz proves so faithful to Ruth and provides her, instructs his men, for example, don't touch her. Do you know, as a foreign young woman in this other culture, how at risk she was if she's just out in the field? And Boaz says, you stay with my women, and I have told my young men to stay away from you. So she's protected, she's provided for. And that provides something else to Naomi. It provides the courage, okay, that she did not have any expectation in returning to Israel. And so they have this sort of elaborate plan where Ruth will ask Boaz to cover her, literally cover her, and to redeem her, which he does. And so the story goes on, and Ruth and Boaz are married, and God blesses them, and they have a male heir. And as the book of Ruth ends, we see Naomi dandling this little guy on her knee, and so her smile is back, her courage is back, her hope is back. And then we get the punchline of the story in the genealogy at the very end. So then they named him Obed, who was the father of, who am I missing here? A generation, yes, Jesse, who is the father of David, okay? So the little guy that she has on her knee that she is so happy about just because God has restored fortune to her is the great-grandfather, no, she's the great-grandfather, is the grandfather of King David. And then we see the further genealogy in Matthew where Ruth is actually mentioned not just as the genealogy of David, but the genealogy of the Messiah, as a woman, as a foreign woman in the genealogy of the Messiah. And this is the thought I want to leave you with. So what does that say? To me, it says what we are about, what we are called to do, the tiniest of the little things that we do. Get each other through one day at a time. We get each other through one day at a time. We get each other through one day at a time, because in the background, and I will call him the God of the background, in the background, God is doing unimaginably big things. Right? So yeah, I know whom I have believed, and I would have never chosen cancer, and I still don't like cancer, and I certainly don't like chemotherapy. But the things in the background, which sometimes we get hints of this side of eternity, and sometimes we wait to see, and the stories we will tell each other in eternity will no doubt fill up all those days that we've got to spend there with God. Pray with me, will you? So God, how can we do anything less, really, than thank you for the things that we didn't want, but the things that we probably did ask for one day in our best moments. And for the courage, and for the hope, and for the smile, to see them through, and to walk with you, and to see one another through, and to wait with expectation to see what it is that you are doing in the background. God, I cannot thank you enough for the people that have reached out to Jeff and I, and my family, and I cannot thank you enough for hope and courage and provision and a measure of health that I didn't expect to have, and for however long and forever, whatever you plan to do with it. And these things in each of our lives. May we learn to embrace them in order to have the moments when we can share like this with one another and say, this is what God was doing. In your name, amen.